Some scars run deep. Even long after the horrors of Mahak Jin's sorcery were forgotten, the scars left in the galaxy's psyche by that perverse power remained. Upon the establishment of the Lazak's Imperium over the bones of the Mahak dynasties, the new emperors wasted no time in forbidding the practice of cloning and genetic manipulation, knowing well the dangers that such practices bring: madness, downfall, death. Such was the legacy of the Mahakt, and the Lazaks would see to it that history was not repeated. Even long after the Mahakt were nothing but legend, respect for the ancient prohibition was maintained, and the ban on genetic tampering was strictly enforced. Throughout the strength of the Lazaks, the emperors severely punished any regime or independent scientist dabbling in that dangerous field. But as the Lazaks began to weaken and imperial hegemony began to break, certain pioneers and madmen began to once more explore that long-forbidden science. Darien Van Haeg was a prominent soul scientist, working at the hospital or clinic in New Moscow when the Grey Fire Plague began. Across the galaxy, Grey Fire, a wasting, brutal disease, began to spread. The illness was particularly common among humans in Letnev, and soon could be found in nearly every ghetto and warren across the stars. Even the Salab slums on Mechatol Rex began to suffer an outbreak. New Moscow was hit particularly hard by the disease, its population nearly decimated. During this outbreak, Darien lost his 2 children, Lucas and Grace, watching them slowly waste away to the leprous sores. He vowed then and there to develop a cure for the disease, and he would leave no stone unturned. In silent revenge against the destiny of his children, he left his position at the hospital or clinic and began to work independently, quickly exhausting the usual methods and technologies legally available to him. And facing failure, the desperate scientist was forced to resort to less orthodox treatments, until eventually he decided genetic therapy had to be the way forward. Throughout his travels, Darien had long heard of lost Mahakt biostudies entombed on the long-dead third moon of Imilpar. If his references could be believed, the studies might offer the secret to curing Grey Fire, and finally ending its ravages on the poor and dispossessed of the galaxy. Boarding a shuttle to the Sol colony of Imilpar, Darien and his wife Moyen left their life on Yord, bent on discovery. And they were not disappointed. On a secret expedition to a ruined Mahakt city, Darien finally found what he was looking for: research notes on the secrets of gene sorcery, including long tracts on cloning. Returning to Yord, Darien studied the Mahak texts long and hard, and as a result, made startling advances in the fields of medicine and gene manipulation. He and Moyen began covert experimentation, using their own unborn children as test subjects. Despite all of this, the cure to Grey Fire still eluded him. Nonetheless, word began to spread. Soon, Darien found himself surrounded by a congregation of the hopeful, many who brought their sick and dying to be healed by Van Haeg's revolutionary treatments. For many, Darien's covert clinics were a last hope, a final resort in the face of devastating disease. These desperate pilgrims came from across the galaxy, hoping against hope that Darien's genius could save them. One such pilgrimage was made by two anguished parents who brought with them a child wasting away from disease. Darien did all he could for the child, but to no avail. The child died, and the parents, furious and understandably heartbroken, reported Darien's underground clinics to the Federation authorities. That night, Darien, Moyen, and most of their devoted followers were forced to flee, with Federation law enforcement close behind. What followed were years of being hunted by Sol and then later Imperial authorities. Planet after planet, the pattern remained the same. Darien and his acolytes would arrive, begin to offer medical aid to those that they found there, before word would spread and they'd be forced to flee. Finally, while dwelling in a temperate polar village on Arnor, Darien saw his chance to break the cycle. There, he met a group of religious pilgrims, intending to migrate to the remote rim world of Lael, far beyond Imperial jurisdiction. Lael's entry in the Hall of Cartography is short and bereft of detail, with the only description of the world calling it a place of harsh oceans and stormy climates. But in the midst of these storms, Darien and Moyen found peace. Finally able to rest and look back, the couple gained perspective on the death of their children, and while still deeply heartbroken, their desperate vengeance lost its edge. Their fugitive years brought them healing, and at long last, Darien and Moyen found happiness again on the windy plains of Lael. But it wouldn't last. Despite its remoteness, Lael and the pilgrims dwelling there still received regular supply runs from smugglers and independent Hakan merchants. And, as if part of some sick, cosmic joke, one of these supply runs brought Greyfire to Lael. Darien and Moyen both worked tirelessly to prevent the spread of the disease, and for a while, it looked like they might succeed, making use of experimental vaccines and eldritch gene sorcery. But one fateful day, Moyen returned home from the clinic with Greyfire. All the zeal and fire that had propelled Darien before returned 1,000-fold. But it was not enough. Moyen died on a cold, gray day, and her body was burned atop the highest summit of the Hills of Grace, which the couple had named after their lost daughter. As Moyen's ashes drifted upwards into the strong winds, Darien dug a stone out of the hillside with his bare hands and placed it near the fire. This stone would one day serve as the cornerstone of the great monastery of Lucas, beating heart of the Brotherhood of Yin. Before his wife succumbed to Greyfire, Darien had, half mad with desperation, successfully removed a single egg from Moyen's womb. It would take him decades of experimentation and study, but finally, a breakthrough. Darien managed to produce a son, a clone created using the genetic template derived from his wife's egg and his own seed. Following the breakthrough, Darien's vision expanded. Cloning Moyen's egg by the thousands, he produced child after child with increasing success. And yet, despite his near mastery of the cloning process, he could only ever produce sons. And what's more, each and every one of them carried a latent genetic weakness to Greyfire. Try as he might to solve this flaw, all he could manage to do was eliminate the lethal outcome of the disease. Greyfire would still attack his son's tissues, hideously deforming most of them. Darien died a broken man, failing to his last day to find a cure to the disease that had haunted him his whole life, or to create a female offspring from his wife's cloned egg. His sons burned him in front of the burgeoning monastery of Lucas, intent on succeeding where he had failed. Diligently, they continued Darien's perverse work, cloning Moyen's egg, which they now called the Yin, and creating brethren using it and their own seed. And so the Brotherhood of Yin grew. Despite their forbidden practices, the Brotherhood attracted converts. Enticed by the miracle medicines and therapies of Darien and his brilliant offspring, many in Rim space began to join the Brotherhood on their mission. Soon, the monastery of Lucas was a sprawling complex, spreading like a cancer over all the hills of grace before spilling out into the surrounding plains. Before long, the Brotherhood abandoned any attempt at creating female offspring of their Holy Father, instead worshipping the Yin as the mother and the feminine in their lives. Idolatrous worship of the Yin became pervasive throughout the Brotherhood's ranks. Instruction gave way to indoctrination, procedure to ritual, filial mission to holy crusade. As the Age of Dusk neared its end, the Brotherhood ventured into space, establishing monasteries on Lael's moons and its surrounding systems. Lael, which they had renamed Darien not so long ago, was not fertile enough to support them any longer, and so many took to the stars, establishing a small, independent theocracy, even as the Lazax Empire breathed its last. Throughout the long night, one would expect the Yin to thrive, given their independence from the galaxy at large, but this was certainly not the case. The Yin cloning procedure took a long time and was resource-intensive, requiring both time and raw materials the Brotherhood simply did not have. Thus, despite being well situated for expansion as the galaxy lay broken, the Brotherhood could never truly capitalize on the opportunity. But all that changed with the invention of the Yin Spinner. In the years leading up to the outbreak of the Custodial Wars, the High Priests of the Yin had an unprecedented breakthrough in cloning technology. Brother Omar had designed a machine which could fabricate fully mature brothers in a matter of days. Only Mahawk technology could rival the might of this new biological loom. And with that invention, the Yin became a true interstellar power. Before long, they were promoted within the Galactic Council from non-voting observers of the Committee of Sects and Prophecies to members in full, able to take part in all legislation. Churches and monasteries dedicated to the worship of the Yin could soon be found on every major planet. Clinics and hospitals were opened by brothers on poorer worlds, winning many over to the Brotherhood's cause. But such a meteoric rise put a target on the Brotherhood, with other factions and races soon realizing the power of the Yin. Many of the regional powers around Darien began to pressure them on all fronts. In particular, the Arborec, who the Yin relied on for Diraxium imports, regularly forced the Brotherhood into uncomfortable positions due to their trade relationship. Following the Acheron incident, for instance, the Arborec were one of the first major civilizations to feel pressure from the Volwraith Cabal, and with no other options, they began to threaten the Yin for help. Facing extortion by the Arborec, the Brotherhood had no choice, and joined the hive mind against the interdimensional threat. With this war still waging, it is unknown what condition the Yin will be left in, but the Zealots are united and burning with common purpose. They will bring Darien's legacy and the light of Yin to the Imperial throne itself. Assuming the interdimensional dinosaurs don't eat them all first.